We are recording even, so, all right. So welcome everyone. This presentation is called String Meta, or Why Your Strings Need Language and Direction Metadata. It's reversed in the program, language and direction metadata on the web, but I think it's maybe more broad than that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Addison Phillips. Today, I'm here wearing the hat of the chair of the Internationalization Working Group at W3C. And this talk is about our document called Strings on the Web, Language and Direction Metadata. That's a really long name, and at W3C, we have what's called the short name, which is how you can find it in the TR directory on the web, and this document is known there as String Meta. So that's what we're going to talk about here. It's an outgrowth of the Internationalization Working Group and the internationalization activity at W3C. And one of the things that we do is we collect the best practices that we have noted over the years in a living document that is called Internationalization Best Practices for Specification Developers, or as we like to call it, SpecDev, because that's a really long title. This is basically a collection of everything that we've codified from looking at specs in W3C over 30 years. And we are a horizontal concern within W3C. What that means is if you are working in a working group at W3C and you write a specification, a rec track document, which is what a standard at W3C is called, before you are allowed to transition it to be a real live standard, you have to go through horizontal review. And there are horizontal concerns: internationalization, accessibility, privacy, security, architecture, that you must submit your thing to. And we have a process for submitting them in GitHub. Someone in the Internationalization Working Group will then read your specification and make comments that the working group debates and be submitted to you, and then those are tracked within the W3C process. You can't make a standard at W3C without horizontal review, which means I will be your new best friend if you want to get to rec with your standard. As you could maybe have seen in the tiny print there, in the few years that we've used GitHub, we've filed over 1,400 issues against different specs. And as we do that, we collect the comments that we make and we try to codify them into best practices and into checklists and other tools for spec developers to use, for working groups to use, so that we're not constantly having to repeat ourselves. Hey, you should have a way to identify the language of localizable text. There it is, it's a best practice, right? So that's, you know, we've captured those things and put them into our tooling to help other people. And in the course of this, we notice patterns where we're repeating comments to people that we need people to pay attention to when writing new specifications, and that's where this comes from. Now, there's two kinds of metadata that we're going to talk about: language metadata and base paragraph direction metadata. And I'm going to start with language metadata. We've been pretty successful with getting language metadata into standards from way, way, way back. So XML lang and HTML is a lang attribute, and lots of different standards. All of the linked data standards have things for language to be associated with a string. And we need to maybe spend a moment to refresh ourselves for why that's important. And the reason everybody says it's important is because of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean font selection. And I don't want to minimize that because it's a real problem. And here's the same 6 characters presented in Japanese, Korean, simplified, and traditional Chinese, and English, which ends up looking an awful lot like Japanese on my computer, but maybe not on yours. And you can see that there are subtle shaping differences in the characters depending on which writing tradition, and sometimes not so subtle. So notice the 4th character in there has a very different shape between, say, Japanese and simplified Chinese. And some of these differences, these are the same exact code points, may make it very difficult for someone to read the text if you show them the wrong one. So yeah, okay, font selection. But language metadata is much more important than just the font selection for CJK. Otherwise, we would just solve it in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean things, and nobody else would care. So I'm going to briefly show you. This may be hard to see. Let's blow it up a little. This is a web page. Here is text. Here is text. They're the same text. I'm going to change the language on this to, let's make it traditional Chinese. Let's make this one simplified Chinese. Or there's Japanese, right? You can see the shapes change. The characters are the same characters when they're changing shape. Okay, but you already showed me that, man. Here is an English string. Let's label it correctly here. Let's label it with French here, just for a moment. As I make this smaller, oh, look, the French is hyphenating. Oh, the English hyphenates too, but it hyphenates differently than the French does. It's subtle, right? It's not super scary, right? But let's pick a different language that now the hyphenation doesn't work at all, right? So if you want hyphenation to work, for example, you need to set the language metadata correctly, and you'll have variations in the performance if you don't. Well, what else could go wrong here? Let's, just for giggles and grins, let's do some French. And again, you can see that we'll reverse the order here. French is much more sensitive, and the hyphenation works very differently. Let's uppercase the text. Oh, Turkish. Turkish does weird stuff with the letter I. That this is still French, but it's got the wrong metadata, and now we have some strange things on there. Oh, let's put quotes around it. Well, the French gets French quotes, but the Turkish gets Turkish quotes. And for that matter, you can get Japanese quotes. Let's make this a little easier to look at. Or, I don't know, Hebrew quotes or whatever. You get all sorts of different effects. And this is just a tiny sampling of the different kinds of things that are language sensitive inside of browsers today, which if you don't have language metadata associated with text, you'll get bad performance. And so that's why we want to have language language metadata sort of generally. Where did my presentation go? PowerPoint. Okay, but we have language direction in a lot of places. What about direction metadata? In order to understand why direction metadata is important, you have to sort of understand a little bit about BiDi. So this is going to be the quickie tutorial about bidirectional text. Bidirectional text has changed somewhat about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. We noticed that there were problems with working with BiDi on the web. And so a number of people, I wasn't necessarily among them, but I was cheering them on, developed this doc, additional requirements for BiDi in HTML and CSS. That resulted in changes to UAX9, the Unicode bidirectional algorithm, and a new class, new way of handling BiDi called BiDi isolation with new control characters and so on to support that. And the modern version of BiDi is easier and better to work with and is generally implemented on the web in HTML. And so that's cool. But you still sort of have things that you have to understand about how this BiDi thing works. So here's a picture of the Amazon UAE website in English. It's available in English and Arabic is obviously a right to left language. And you will notice right away that these two versions of the website are very, very similar. They have effectively the same content, save for some personalization stuff, but they're somewhat reversed in their layout, which is the expectation that people have if they speak Arabic. And I used to work at Amazon, so I'm going to pick on them a little bit today, but this is true. Everything I'm going to show you here is true just generally on the web. It's true in real life too. Here's a magazine in Arabic that I picked up on a trip somewhere, and you'll notice that the cover is on the back, which is to say it's on the front if you speak Arabic, and the back is on the other side of the magazine, right? There are more languages than just Hebrew and Arabic that use BiDi in the modern world. Here's a list of some of them: Adlam, Rohingya, Enco, Syriac, Tana. And of course, many languages use the Arabic script, but are not Arabic. We generally break things into two kinds of languages. There's left to right, so Bahrain, Egypt, Kuwait. And on the bottom, we have the Arabic equivalent is a right to left language. So Al-Bahrain, Misr, Al-Kuwaiti is what that says. It's Bahrain, Egypt, and Kuwait in Arabic. And it goes from right to left. And the Unicode bidirectional algorithm shows us how to do that. You start with a paragraph, and a paragraph has a base direction. You break the text in the paragraph into lines, and you lay out runs of text, left to right or right to left, runs of text along the lines in the direction of the base paragraph direction. So Bahrain, Misr, Kuwait goes from left to right on that line when you're laying it out. So there are 3 runs there. If the base direction were right to left, Bahrain, Misr, Kuwait, exclamation point, we get 4 runs now, and they lay out from right to left. And notice that Bahrain is on the right side, the starting side of the line when the base direction is right to left. Unicode assigns all of the characters a directionality. Some characters have a strong direction. Some characters have a weak direction. That is, they go in a specific direction, but they don't break the directional run. Numbers are a very common case for that. And then there are neutral characters that get their direction from their context. They look at the characters and around them in the base paragraph direction, and they pick up their direction from that. So the exclamation point that we saw in the previous example, it's a neutral, and it's picking up its direction from the base paragraph direction and the letters next to it. Let's go crazy. Let's look at this in real life. So here's Bahrain, Egypt, Kuwait. I can change the base direction, this little Java program. And you can see the exclamation point is now on the right. That's kind of boring. Here's the Arabic. And that looks okay, except now this exclamation point is on the end. But this word here is al-Bahrain. Right? So it's doing that same, the exclamation point is on the other end as we saw with the English in the right to left context. That's kind of difficult to grok, but let's look at a bigger example. The title is, and then there's the Arabic in Arabic. And the problem that we see is that the exclamation point is on the wrong end of the Arabic string if you speak Arabic. And so if you want to fix that, you can by putting in a strongly directional right to left mark, which is invisible, but you can see in the bottom, I have it sort of syntax highlighted with \u escapes. And now it is, now it's on the end of the text. I talked about numbers being weakly directional. So here's a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that I put in the middle of this Arabic sentence. The number goes from left to right, because it's weakly left to right directional, but it does not break the right to left run of the overall Arabic sentence. So I'm going to click in here in the middle, and I'm going to type a space. What do you think is going to happen when I type the space? Boo! I'm still in a right to left run, so the two tokens 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 switch over because they're laid out from right to left. I type a dash, and I get the same thing. I type a dot, oh, crumpets. Some characters do not break the run, and others do, and it depends on what the numbers are. There's also some contextual things. This is Arabic, and Arabic behaves a little bit differently, for example, than Hebrew does. So, and let's go back to our friend here, and we'll get rid of the text. I would like to say that Egypt is better than, greater than Kuwait. So I'm going to type a greater than symbol, and it points to the left. But the character in memory is down here, is the greater than symbol that in an English keyboard points to the right side. This is a mirroring character, and so according to its context, it will change its shape to point in different directions. There are a lot of these characters that are somewhat contextual. Now let's change the context. It's still pointing the other way because the base direction is right to left. But when I change the base direction, it now points from left to right, yeah. So there, the base direction is influencing it simply because the left to right run for Egypt is located next to the character. So this is all very good. Let's do one last little trick here. I have this on the web as well. Here is some equation. I make it display from right to left. Here, the enclosing punctuation is shaping itself. It's mirroring and also pairing up. And you can see this if I change the initial thing to be a square bracket. The square bracket mirrors itself, and it's trying, although you can't see it here, to pair up with another enclosing bracket somewhere to form a complete thing. So the algorithm provides pretty good support for trying to pair these kinds of things up, but they can get kind of messy if one is not careful. So yeah, one last thing before we leave this part of the demo. Actually, I want to do it in the other one. When I do a selection, you get multiple regions on the screen when you have bidirectional text. The reason for that, you can see in the bottom box, which is that the text is contiguous in the memory of the computer. So Adil did a lovely presentation of what Pages does with this yesterday. And this kind of discontiguousness is because underneath the hood, we have a logical representation of the characters running all in one continuous flow. And this bidirectional interplay that we see here can cause problems as we move along. So we've talked about those things. Let's talk about spillover effects. So a common thing to want to do is to have a message. If you saw my message format presentation, I have this message and I want to put some numbers in at runtime. So this is a real string from my past life. Price of some amount plus some amount in currency amount in shipping. And this is what the Arabic translation is supposed to look like. This is what the Arabic translation actually looks like when it gets to the screen. Because if you think about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a weekly left to right thing. And then it's got USD, or excuse me, it's got AED after it. That starts a new left to right run, because this number here is weekly left to right. It's still part of this right to left run. But this thing starts a new left to right run. The plus is neutral. It continues the left to right run. The number 1299 is weekly left to right. It continues the left to right run. And then we got USD at the end, finishing the left to right run. And then we finally get the word shipping. So this is word salad. And it is word salad. I don't care which way you display it, left to right or right to left. So base direction is not helping you with this. And so you need something to help this. This is where our friend bidirectional isolation comes in. In HTML, any element that has a dir attribute on it, a dir attribute on it, is automatically isolating. So I can do that. And now that one number is healed. I can come over here and put a span around that. And now both numbers are healed and the string reads marginally correctly. It reads actually correctly if I set the direction right to left. Let's this is the classic example, purple pizza for reviews. But what if you went to a Hebrew named restaurant instead? Well, there's two problems with it here. One, there's an obvious problem here. The English is backwards now for reviews. But if this is an English user interface, then it's really screwy. This is not, I went to the restaurant for and I had purple pizza reviews, right? So, and again, byte isolation can come to our rescue. You might be thinking that the element is magic. If I take the dir out, it does this. So you have to have the dir to get the isolation behavior. Now, why am I showing you all of this spillover stuff and all that? Can't I just go and fix everything? Well, I'm going to pick on Amazon one more time. Here's the name of a product, and I will go to show you I'm not making this up. I will find where I left my browser. Here is that product on the UAE website. I didn't have to search extravagantly hard. Almost any product that has some kind of ASCII stuff in it, and there are many, many products, not just computers, but computers are great examples, that have ASCII stuff in it, will cause bidirectional spillover problems. And the thing that you're seeing here is the name of a product. This product is the, I did the Google Translate on it. The HP Envy, some product number, 211 laptop, Intel Core, blah, 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 right? This string was not made by a human being. The commas that you see in there are series of things that are interesting about the product, which were assembled by a computer to make the search relevancy of this particular product work a little better. This is also, although you can't see it on my slide, obviously, is also the title of that web page. So Google will find it and blah, 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 right? So this all looks good if you do not speak Arabic. If you speak Arabic, you will quickly notice that this is total garbage. It is word salad. You cannot understand what this thing is trying to say. And I will go back over here. We will copy this text. Oops. We will set it right to left. and we'll try to figure it out. So HP, laptop, this is the word NV transliterated. And then we have the product number, X360 14 blah, 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 2. It is not a DX2 product. This is 2 in 1. Okay? So 2 and 1 wants to be together. So we need to fix that. So we can do that. We've seen how to do that. Open span, find the 1 over here, close span, update. I've solved one problem. The next problem is, this says Intel Core. It is not Intel Core 1 terabyte SSD. It is Intel Core, this thing way over here. You see this character here? U060C. What is U060C? It's an Arabic comma. If I take this text here and I go to a brain dead, I'm sorry, Sublime. I love you too, but only a little. And I replace the commas with close span, open span pairs. I can heal the whole block of text so that each of the segments that was being used to assemble this message is isolated and therefore presents in the right way, regardless of how I line break it. A machine made this string. A machine needed to take each of the base directionally different things and do the isolation on them. And there's a few things in here where left to right direction is actually preferred so that it will look normal when we are changing line breaks. This is kind of enumerated in our document, use cases for BiDi and language metadata on the web. And the reason I've taken you through all of that is everywhere we look, there are document formats being created. We get the strings for various pieces of data. We send them down the wire, and then some program is putting them into a web page or into a document format or into something, and there's no direction metadata. And so therefore, they don't set a dir span around anything. They don't insert any of those BiDi controls I was showing you. They just concatenate out the string. So Amazon wasn't evil in making that string. They didn't have anything to work from because it all came down the wire as this JSON thing. Here's the name of the product. Here's the list of features. Make that into a title. So what do we suggest that you do? Well, for starters, understand that there's a lot of strings in the world that are not natural language text strings. They do not want language and direction metadata. They're perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to have some ID be a string, and then you send that down the wire without any language and direction metadata. Cool. When you go to display it inside of a natural language string, if you ever have to, you should BiDi isolate it because otherwise bad things can happen. You probably want to left to right isolate it, but you could use auto and it will be fine. And we'll look at maybe an example later if we have time of why that's true. Anywhere you have a natural language string, you need to have language and direction metadata. So here is a web IDL description called localizable that you should use as a pattern if you have a localizable string, natural language string in your document format, and it always has a language and a direction. Our meta request is for any natural language string in a document, you should be able to determine the language and direction of that specific string. And if it doesn't match the document as a whole, you need to be able to override it. That way you can just query the metadata pieces and assemble your, for example, HTML easily, and you can assume that the information will be there. Some files have lots and lots of natural language text strings in them, and you do not wish to type all the curly bracketed jazz. every single time you see one of those. And so you can say at the document level, the language of this document is generally ENUS, and the direction of this document is generally LTR, and I only have to use that localizable thing when the thing I'm working with is somehow different. This is built into a few places. JSON LD provides an @context mechanism that you just use out of the box. It's got language and direction in them. The direction came from that horizontal review process I mentioned before. But there are other places where this is not a built-in mechanism. You will have to roll your own, and we have some guidance for how to do that. In some cases, it is inconvenient to generate a separate file or do language negotiation for a request. And so you might want to send more than one language down the wire when you send the document down the wire. And so a common way to do that is to use what's called string indexing and to use what's called a language map in order to accomplish this. We have a recommended structure for that. There's WebIDL for it. It's a language entry and a language map. There's always a string value. Optionally, you can add a language or direction override to the string, and then each entry is keyed by a language tag. And you select the best matching language tag from the language map in order to decide what to show. One of the reasons to have a language override is that the key that you use for the resource might be less specific than the actual resource uses. So in this example, you see the French thing is keyed for FR. I don't have any other FRs, other FR translations, but when you read this, you should use a Quebecois sort of accent to it, I guess. Maybe that's a hokey example, but this gives you the control to be able to say this is a little different. I think the example one group was using is, I want to have the French brand name Hermès. I want it to be read with a French voice, not Hermes, as it would be pronounced, but it's still the English translation, right? So EN, Hermès, lang equal FR. And then base direction metadata is useful for overriding things. It's especially useful because like you'll have the Arabic in here and everything else in the file is LTR, but you want to be able to find out that that one is RTL, right? Especially because it may start with a strong character that's not RTL, and so it would be misleading to use auto. Here's another example of what a language map might look like. In other cases, there are different strategies. The other strategy to use, of course, is that you have multiple files. Each file is a separate resource file that you can retrieve according to what your language needs are. And of course, there are combinations of these strategies. We have a document developing localizable manifests, which is due for a slight update with some of this information. So look in a month. But where we talk about what some of those different document strategies are. And then, as I say, you can find what I've been talking about so far in the strings on the web, the string meta document, and our best practices. Why am I haranguing groups to pick this up? The easy case, we always talk about the easy cases first. You have a data source, you make a data file, you send the data file down, and then you're going to insert the values into a string. But it's important that everybody start to do this in the same way and to consistently do it everywhere, because the world doesn't look like that. The world is actually lots of, this file came over here and went through this process and went into another document format. And this document has language metadata and that one doesn't have it. And so developers can't count on and therefore build consistent structures to extract the language and direction metadata, because they have to build a different one depending on which file format it was coming from. So if everybody does this in the same way, then we will have a much more consistent behavior, and people will not only consume the metadata, which is important. I hope I've shown why it's important, but they'll also produce and store and serialize it way back here at the data source, because that's the missing link that we actually have to have, is you actually have to have language and direction metadata in order to serialize it and pass it down and consume it. There was a suggestion, and I spent 3 years in a blind alley chasing after, we should get a new string type in JavaScript to do this. A feeling that I thought there's no chance, the snowflake's chance in a very warm location. And I was correct. There was no chance that we were going to get a new data type. And so I think that we've alighted on the right result, which is here are the web IDL patterns and their associated structures. Just do this. And everyone does it the same way. We will be in a reasonable shape for being able to produce quality, linguistically correctly displayed and processed data. And when it is bidirectional, it will be not salad anymore. I talked in my message format talk about food, water, and air. Right now, we're at the food buffet stage. You can choose to do this. I'm looking to push this up into water supply. Everybody is doing this in their specifications, and adopting new specifications will automatically think that here's a language string. Either I need to make it localizable in one of the localization strategies, or I at least need to have the metadata present so that people can display and process this correctly. And over time, I hope that that tooling and libraries and so forth will expect that this is present and will help us enforce that in terms of general usability and development. Here are the links, but of course you can find them in many different places. Last thing. So Fu Chao, my partner in crime at W3C, is here. Show of hands, nobody else should be raising their hand. How many of you are participating in the W3C international activity on an active basis? Hi, Fu Chao. Good to see you, man. We do not have good support from the industry right now. And you're all coasting on the two of us, and Richard's part-time now, and we have some other W3C people, but none of you are participating. And we need a next generation to step up, and we need the current generation to step up and to help us drive the right behaviors, because 1,400 bugs in about 5 years, right? So there's long specs that have to be read, but there's other ways to contribute in many different ways. Tex, you've done a bunch of things over the years, so but again, you're all riding on our coattails, and my coattails are not long, and it's kind of draggy like this, So, who has questions? Sir.
So I know IC4X doesn't. So in IC4X we don't tag our strings, and I think ICU doesn't do it either. Do you think libraries should move to this model?
To localizable string model?
Yes. Or is this more of like a DOM thing?
Maybe-ish, but mostly no, because there's always that, should I make an L string or should I make a string? And strings already exist and developers are used to them. And so you have these strings that are carefully filtering out the metadata when you're not using the special one. And so if people think in terms of data structures, there's a data structure that I'm going to have, but your mileage may vary. In your environment, it may make a lot of sense for you to have a metadata string. So.
Well, I'm thinking less about implementation and more about what do we give to a user. Like, should we propagate this directionality or this locale annotation out of our libraries?
Yes, when you send data down the wire, I don't care if it's a file or data structure or whatever, you should propagate the language and direction meta. Every string that's natural language should have identifiable language and direction metadata associated with it so that you can propagate it and so that you can consume it locally for display. Otherwise, you can't do the things.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to add, great talk, Addison. But as a former I18N Working Group member, some of you may be thinking that you don't have the expertise to participate or the experience, but this is a great way to improve your skills, learn from others, learn from the experts. And some of the roles may be that, initially my first document, I didn't actually author it, but I provided some editing for a base document that was already there. And as a part of the discussions around that, I became more familiar with the goals and the requirements for the W3C to get a spec going, but I also learned about the technology. And they need people who can author, people who can deal with programming, people who can think about web structures and how people author pages. So there's a lot of opportunity, and don't assume that you don't have the skills, because you will gain some of the skills while you're there. And it didn't take a lot of time out of the working month or so. That's
An hour
depending
a week
on
is
how
all I
engaged
ask.
you get. Sorry, go ahead.
An hour a week is all I ask to start,
Just watch the to start. Read the small print.
And then your enthusiasm blooms. And
So we've come to the end of our time. So do come up and talk to Addison if you have any further questions, but we can give him a rousing round of applause.